Alright guys, welcome back to Mr. Post Frame. Today is going to be setting your trusses and installing your purlins. Before we get started, let us help you out designing your post frame home, shop, garage, whatever the case is. Email us, design@mrpostframe. We design for people all over the country. Our designs contain a lot of structural value so that you can have success building these on your own if you are a self-builder, which leads me into my next point. If you're a self-builder, we have a Patreon group that's just for you guys. It's a community of other self-builders that share their experiences, their trials, their tribulations, things they do different. We also bring on special guests. We talk about different self-building topics, so check that out. But let's go ahead and put some trusses up. Getting ready to lift your trusses, there's a lot of things to consider. How wide they are, how tall they are, what piece of equipment are you using to lift them. On a single story, you can easily do that with a skid steer. But when you get into a two-story building, 18-foot sidewall, 19-foot sidewall, your best bet is a telehandler because you have way more lifting capacity and height than what you really need, and it makes life a lot easier. We've done enough with the teleskid. I kind of know what my limits are, and so these trusses are only 36 foot wide, so weight is not an issue. So I just have to make sure that my boom has enough rigidity lifting it, and I can get the height. Whenever you do your end truss, wherever you strap it, you got to think about where the columns are going to be. So my column's about right here, so I'm just on the outside of that. That works for me. I like using straps over truss hooks because truss hooks can fall off, this cannot. So once I latch this on, unless it breaks, it can't come off, and I like that assurity. So if somebody forgets to do their job and keep an eye on the truss hooks, you could end up dropping a truss or something. So I like using straps. If you get into a really wide truss, we'll run a 20-foot 2x4 on the bottom cord and screw it in to give it more rigidity. You also should look at getting a truss spreader bar once you get up to a higher, a wider truss as well. And if you look at your instructions, it'll tell you kind of what the basic rules are. At least the ones I get, they'll tell you, hey, you need to use a truss spreader bar. This is where you should lift from, this is where you shouldn't lift from, all that kind of good stuff. So we're gonna get the end truss up, and then the inside common trusses, I can kind of put my straps wherever I need to put them because there are no columns in the middle. They're free span trusses, so they're only gonna make contact with columns on the outside sidewalls. So we're gonna get this all hooked up to the boom. I gotta get my boom all extended. I gotta get some chains on it to give it side to side rigidity. And then hopefully the guys will be ready and we can start putting these up. So one thing to mention on our end wall columns is I do the calculations when I'm getting my materials, and I want my columns to go all the way to the top cord of the truss. I'll take all 3 plies or 4 plies in this case, and I will run them all the way up to the top cord of the truss. That way that truss is attached to that column in multiple locations, and it goes all the way down. I feel like that's a better connection than stopping them short. Some guys will run 1 ply, which is fine, but I run all 3 ply or 4 ply all the way up to the top cord. few things to talk about when setting your trusses. One is how many people is ideal, and 3 is a really good number because you have 1 person in the machine, you have 2 people on the straps on each end of the truss, and then also when they go up, you have a person on each side to get the truss in the pocket. So a couple things that make this process easier, obviously the straps. We put a strap around the first web of the truss. That helps us guide it in. It helps us lift our big, huge jumbo nailer up and down, and then it helps us lock our trusses in once we actually have them in place. Another key thing is to take a 2x4 and make a wedge, and you'll place that wedge in here at the bottom, hammered in, and what that does is it opens this pocket up, so when your truss is coming down, it slides in easier. This can be a really tight fit if you don't do that, so we'll hammer a wedge in there, and then once we get the truss started and it's down quite a ways, we'll knock it out. That just makes part of your job a little bit easier. We will run structural lags in to squeeze this together, and then we'll nail it off with 30D ring shank nails. I will come back once the building is all squared, plumbed. We'll run 1/2 inch through bolts through here, through the top cord of the truss, through each side of the column, and squeeze that all together. That gives you a lot of extra strength there. This building is 36 feet wide. So one question I get is, should I order my trusses 35 feet 9 inches? And the answer to that is no. You should order them the width of the building, and then the truss will sit even with the outside of your girt. If you look here, our truss is flush with this girt here. That way you're getting the full width of your building there, and everything will be lined up the way it needs to be. It gives you another thing that we'll do is we'll mark 1.5 inches before we raise this truss here, so we have a visual line to line up on both sides of the truss when we're putting this into place. And a lot of times what we'll have to do is get the truss in there, and then you can hit the column in or out to get it even with your line, put a screw in there, and then once you plumb the building, that'll get brought back into the position that it needs to be. There is enough play in these columns that you can move them back and forth to get them lined up. Oh, we're going to start above the line. Okay. Starting with our purlins, we got our marks here, so we just have to line those up at the edge of our truss here, and then we'll be at the same spacing that we are at the bottom of our columns. Out here, got my acquired overhang length right here. Lined up my line, put my Purlin screw in, and then this first set of purlins will be above the line, and then when we do the next set, they'll be below the line and they'll overlap.
I'm in the center of the board, center of the truss, right there. And it needs to go towards you. Yep.
What do you need, Cash?
It's good right there. Yep.
Another thing that we're going to talk about here with the installation is the purlins. Where the purlins overlap, most places will say you need a 6-inch overlap. We go ahead and do a 1-foot overlap on each side. And doing that with 8 foot on center, we use a 20-foot purlin on the ends because that gives us enough board to get out to get our overhang. And then we'll use 18-footers in the inside bays because then that'll give us 1-foot overlap on each side. Here is an overlap detail here. So you can just see they stick out 1 foot on each side. And then what I do is you can either nail them or screw them together. I screw them together, just squeeze them together nice before we do our plywood. And then on the bottom cord of the truss, when you get your trusses, order your trusses, they are going to be engineered by the truss manufacturer for the spacing that you need. And they're going to come with a set of installation instructions. So they're going to tell you where to nail them, where to put your purlins. And you can see here we have bottom cord bracing. And what we do is we run these upright and just put Purlin screws down through into the bottom cord of the truss. And that locks all the bottom cords into place so they can't move. And you can actually make a set of these. We'll figure out how many sets we need. And when we're making our roof purlins, we'll just make these because they're going to be exactly the same except for the end one. The end one's going to be cut off flush with the truss. But you can make these when you lay out and cut your and prepare your top cord purlins. Another reason you'll see a lot of guys will run these flat, which is fine, but the reason I run these on end, because if I'm coming in here to frame the interior of this up, or this is my house, I'm going to actually eventually run a second set of these 1 foot over and then put 1/2-inch OSB over the top of these to make a walkway. Because with an 8-foot spacing, if you need to get up in your attic, you need a walkway to get from one side of your building to the other. You're not going to want to step on your ceiling joists, whether they're 2x4s or 2x6s, because you could end up cracking your drywall. So you will want to make a walk path with these. That's why we run them on end, so they're stronger and there's no issue with us walking across them. All right, so one more detail on our purlins is we will start our 24-inch measurements from the fascia board, and we'll go 24 on center until we get to the top. And then our last purlin, which we space down 6.5 inches to the bottom side, is going to run in line. So what this is here is just a 2-foot block that we screw these into. So you can see that top board is all in line. And then this is just a block just to give this a little bit of extra strength. This is bearing on this truss 3/4 inch. And then we'll run Purlin screws down through to make sure that's good and solid. But the reason we do this is so when we put our ridge cap on, we have a solid purlin to screw it into all the way down. And we do that on both sides. Alright, so we had a nice day today. We got our end wall and our last truss to put up. So we went ahead and built this whole end wall down here on the ground. And we're going to lift it in 2 pieces. There's a 16-foot garage door and a 9-foot. So what we'll do is we'll unhook it where we're not going to lift, and we'll move this section out over there. And then we can drag this back where we can stand it up. We just have to make sure we miss that. So we're actually going to have to probably drag it quite a ways. Across the bottom of the doors, we'll just run a 2x6 and screw it in just to stabilize and keep the spacing on those two columns. All of our boards are cut to go in between. This was a little bit goofy here, only because there is 6 foot wide by 2 foot tall windows above the garage. So this is 16 foot, so I had to center basically like a stub column in between here that'll go all the way up to the top cord of the truss. And then I got a double 2x12 header here just so we won't have any sag here ever. So couldn't use just 16 foot boards, we had to splice them here. So I overlapped a 2x6 just while we lift it to hold that, make sure nothing comes apart. I want to make sure that stays together nice and solid. But we should be able to get this up here in the next hour and get this whole end wall built out and our end truss up. Alright, that's going to be a wrap on today's video. Hopefully that was enjoyable to you guys. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, share us with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next video.